John Wayne Gacy was born at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois on March 17, 1942. Gacy was the second of 3 children and only son to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. His father was a World War I veteran and worked as an auto mechanic. Gacy's mother was a homemaker, and she took care of her 3 children. Gacy was of Polish and Danish ancestry, and his family was Catholic. John Wayne Gacy was very close to his mother and 2 sisters, but he had a very turbulent relationship with his father. John Stanley Gacy was an alcoholic who was verbally and physically abusive to his whole family. The elder John Stanley Gacy frequently belittled his son, calling him dumb and stupid and comparing him unfavorably to his 2 sisters. One of John Wayne Gacy's earliest childhood memories was of his father beating him with a leather belt at the age of 4. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's abuse. John Stanley Gacy would often scold and belittle his son, often telling him that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who would probably grow up queer. In 1949, Gacy's father whipped him with a razor strop after he and another boy were caught sexually fondling a young girl. That same year, a family friend began to occasionally sexually assault the young Gacy. John Wayne Gacy never told his father of this abuse. He was afraid that his father would blame him. Despite their unhealthy and often violent relationship, John Wayne Gacy loved his father, but felt that he was never good enough in his father's eyes. As John Wayne Gacy grew older, he enrolled in Northwestern Business College, despite having failed to complete high school. John Wayne Gacy graduated in 1963 and took a management trainee position at the Nunn Bush Shoe Company. In 1964, the company transferred him to Springfield, Illinois, to work as a salesman and eventually promoted him to department manager. In March of that year, John Wayne Gacy became engaged to Marilyn Myers, and the couple would eventually get married in September of 1964. Marilyn's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple moved there so John Wayne Gacy could manage the restaurants, with the understanding that they would move into Marilyn's parents' former home. Gacy would receive $15,000 per year, which is the equivalent of about $144,000 in 2023. Gacy would also take shares of the restaurant's profits. Gacy eventually opened a club in his basement where his employees could drink alcohol and play pool. Although John Wayne Gacy employed teenagers of both sexes, Gacy would socialize only with the young men. John Wayne Gacy gave them alcohol before he made sexual advances. If they refused his advances, Gacy would claim his advances were jokes or just a test of morale. Gacy's wife gave birth to a son in February of 1966 and a daughter in March of 1967. Gacy later described this period of his life as perfect. John Wayne Gacy had also finally earned his father's approval. When Gacy's parents visited in July of 1966, his father privately apologized for the years of abuse that he inflicted before happily saying, "Son, I was wrong about you," as he shook Gacy's hand. John Wayne Gacy initially seemed like an upstanding member of the community. He was known for his involvement in local politics, charity work, and his role as Pogo the Clown at children's parties. However, beneath the clown's makeup, John Wayne Gacy was harboring a dark secret. Gacy would eventually divorce Marilyn Myers in 1969. With help from his mother, John Wayne Gacy bought a ranch house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township, Illinois. In August of 1971, shortly after John Wayne Gacy and his mother moved into the house, Gacy became engaged to Carol Hoff, whom he had briefly dated in high school. Carol and her 2 young daughters from a previous marriage moved into the Gacy's home soon after, and they were married on July 1st, 1972. John Wayne Gacy was active in his local community and helpful towards his neighbors. He willingly loaned his construction tools and plowed snow from neighborhood walks free of charge. From 1974 to 1978, John Wayne Gacy hosted themed annual summer parties. These events were attended by up to 400 people, including politicians and business associates. By 1975, John Wayne Gacy had told his wife that he was bisexual. After the couple had sex on Mother's Day that year, he informed her that this would be the last time that they would do so. He began spending most evenings away from home, only to return in the early mornings with the excuse that he had been working late or conducting business meetings. Carol observed Gacy bringing teenage boys into his garage in the early hours and also found gay pornography and men's wallets and identifications inside the house. When she confronted Gacy about these items, he informed her angrily that it was none of her business. In October 1975, after a heated argument, Carol asked Gacy for a divorce. But Carol continued to live in the house on 8213 West Somerdale Avenue until February of 1976. John Wayne Gacy's first known murder occurred on January 3rd in 1972. According to Gacy's later account, following a family party the previous evening, Gacy drove to the Civic Center in the Loop in the early morning to view a display of ice sculptures. Gacy met and lured 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and into his car. McCoy was on his way to his father's home in Omaha, Nebraska, and informed John Wayne Gacy his bus to Nebraska was not due until noon. Gacy took McCoy on a sightseeing tour of Chicago and then drove him to his home with the promise that he could spend the remainder of the night and be driven back to the station in time to catch the bus. Prior to McCoy's identification, he was known as the Greyhound busboy. Gacy claimed that he woke early in the following morning to find McCoy standing in the bedroom doorway holding a kitchen knife. Gacy jumped from his bed and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm. Gacy disarmed McCoy, banging his head against the bedroom wall and kicking him against his wardrobe. McCoy kicked Gacy in the stomach, doubling him over, but Gacy then grabbed McCoy, wrestled him to the floor, and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest. As McCoy lay dying, Gacy claimed he washed the knife in his bedroom, then went to his kitchen and saw the makings of breakfast on the table. Gacy also claimed that McCoy had set the table for 2 and that he walked into Gacy's room to wake him while absent-mindedly carrying the knife. Gacy buried McCoy in his crawl space and later covered his grave with a layer of concrete. In an interview several years after his arrest, Gacy said that immediately after killing McCoy, he felt totally drained, and noted that as he stabbed McCoy and as he listened to the gargulation and grasping, he had experienced a mind-numbing orgasm. He added, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys, 26 of whom he buried in his crawl space underneath his house. Once captured and inside Gacy's home, Gacy's usual modus operandi was to lure a youth with drinks, drugs, or generally gaining his trust. He would then produce a pair of handcuffs to show a magic trick, sometimes as part of a clowning routine. John Wayne Gacy typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then released himself with a hidden key. He then offered to show his intended victim the trick. With his victim restrained, John Wayne Gacy proceeded to sexually assault and torture his victims. Gacy frequently began by sitting on or straddling his victim's chest before forcing his victim to perform sexual acts on him. John Wayne Gacy would then inflict acts of torture, including burning with cigars, making his captive imitate a horse as he sat on their back and pulled on the makeshift reins around their necks. Gacy would violate his victims with foreign objects such as sex toys and prescription bottles after he had sodomized his captive. Gacy would secure his captive's ankles by a 2x4 with handcuffs attached to each end, an act inspired by the Houston mass murders. He also taunted many victims throughout their abuse and was known to have partly drowned several in the bathtub before repeatedly reviving them. John Wayne Gacy would then murder his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their neck and progressively tightening it with a hammer handle, which he referred to as the rope trick, frequently informing his victims, "This is the last trick." Occasionally, the victim would convulse for an hour or two before dying. Although several victims died from asphyxiation from cloth gags stuffed deep in their throats. With John Wayne Gacy being responsible for over 30 murders of young men and boys, these murders would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He lived this secret for many years. That was until 1978, when John Wayne Gacy's sadistic crimes were truly uncovered. In December of 1978, a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest disappeared. His family reported him missing, and while police started an investigation into the disappearance, all roads would lead to John Wayne Gacy. Detectives had already submitted a search warrant for the Gacy home. They found very little in terms of evidence, but the police were on the right track, as many of Gacy's past victims had come forward and told detectives of Gacy's crimes of sadistic torture. On December 21st, in 1978, police obtained a second search warrant for John Wayne Gacy's home, where they discovered a gruesome and horrifying scene. The crawl space underneath 8213 West Somerdale Avenue was filled with the decaying bodies of his victims, some of which were so badly decomposed that they were unrecognizable. John Wayne Gacy had been living on top of a burial ground. After being informed by detectives of what they had found in his crawl space, John Wayne Gacy stated to the officers that he wanted to clean the air. In the early morning hours of December 22, 1978, John Wayne Gacy confessed to murdering 30 young males. His trial began in 1980, and he was found guilty of multiple counts of murder. Gacy was sentenced to death, and he spent over a decade on death row while appealing his case. The case of John Wayne Gacy shocked the nation and led to increased scrutiny of individuals who held positions of trust within the community, as Gacy had worked as a clown at children's parties and had a reputation as being a community-minded citizen. John Wayne Gacy's crimes and the gruesome details of his life continue to captivate public interest, and his story serves as a chilling reminder of the capacity for evil that can hide behind seemingly normal exterior.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now. Yeah, right. Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this, And I says, because it's in a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.